There comes a time in your life when you cross paths with the person who reminds you of the best parts of yourself. The soul connection is made when these best parts of you are reflected back to you by this person, and in turn, you reflect theirs back to them. This intertwining with your soulmate allows you to see yourself more clearly in the looking glass. You can see the opposites joining together in harmony, cool and warm, rough and smooth, light and dark. This all combines to compose a melody that moves slower and deeper. It is the tie that binds you to your second soul.
How did you come up with the name Second Soul?
The name was special. It has layers to it. There's multiple meanings. Now, it's a very simple name, obviously, on the surface, Second Soul. It's like, okay, well, the first thing people would think, well, your first one was Brass and Soul, so this is the sequel. And you're right. That is one of the meanings. But there's more to it. Another layer is the fact that the first fragrance, Brass and Soul, the story of it is centered around the first set of music. So it is the beginning of the concert. It is electric, it is fiery, it is exciting, and then it kind of calms down to this resonant hum by the end of the first set. And then typically there's a set break. Now, the set break is not something that we're dealing with. Maybe we'll deal with that in the next fragrance. But we're skipping to the second set of music. The second set of music is, at least in this case, going to be a little bit darker, a little bit more mellow. Not everyone sticks around for the second set, so the room is a little bit emptier. The candles are a little bit dimmer. The vibe and the mood in the room is just different. Overall, darker. So that is the second meaning. The third meaning is, at least in my story, and the idea is that you can insert yourself into the story however you see fit. And that's where we have this whole reflective thing, which we'll get to. But in my story, there's literally a second soul in the room, that being Grace. So the way I tell my narrative is that I'm on the stage, I'm playing a ballad, which is a soft, slower, more romantic number. And I notice Grace, who I did not see before. I didn't see her in the first set. So she's literally a second soul in the room. So that is where the name comes from in a nutshell. It is a triple entendre, if you will.
So beautiful. I think a lot of people are going to wonder about this. How does the scent compare or relate to Brass and Soul?
It's a great question. Yeah, so if you look at the note breakdown, you'll see some overlap with the original, and you also see some differences. And the note breakdown honestly won't tell you the whole story, which is pretty typical. It's really exciting. When you look at some of these notes that we're using, rum on the rocks and tobacco and the suede and the smoke and the labdanum and all that stuff, really exciting stuff, especially for a darker fragrance. But that doesn't tell the whole story, because what we really have here is Brass and Soul. If you've smelled the original, when you spray Second Soul, you will smell Brass and Soul, but you'll mostly smell the base of it. You'll smell kind of where Brass and Soul leaves off in its dry down. And this wasn't everyone's experience. From what I understand, some people claim that Brass and Soul just remained a bar of soap on their skin for 5 full hours and then it was gone. And that's your experience. I can't do anything about that. But I think most people did experience it in its entirety, where it is meant to start fresh and cooling and invigorating and bright, and then dry down to something sweeter and more ambery and vanilla and darker. So Second Soul basically picks up where that leaves off. Not exactly. There's already more depth to it than that, but that's the general idea. It starts off a little bit more ambery, a little bit warmer, definitely darker, spicier, and a little edgier. You're already getting the tobacco and the smoke kind of right away. And then it goes deeper than that, if you can imagine that. So again, trying to match the mood of the second set, trying to match this connection that is now taking place in the second set that is beyond the music. But the music, as I put it, is a melody that kind of binds everything together. So that's the best way I can say it in words. Obviously, if you smell it, you'll know.
This fragrance, it really opens up the narrative to include the audience and have them find themselves in the story.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, originally when I had created the narrative for the Second Soul, it was just a continuation. It was like still my experience. But when I brought it to George, as we started to think of ideas for the presentation, he was really drawn to the idea of the second soul, like a second person. He thought that was beautiful, and he kept telling me that. So then he's like, well, what if we make something like a mirror? And I'm like, I like that. But I was like, I don't know how that fits exactly, but maybe it'll evolve. And it did. So the more we talked about it, we actually created the presentation. So what we came up with is, again, this reflective nature of, in the narrative that I wrote that you heard at the beginning of this video, this reflection and how when you find that person whom you connect with and they reflect the best parts of you and then you reflect the best parts of them, and this connection is born, and it goes on and on. So we wanted to find a way for you to see a little bit of yourself in the fragrance. And so what better way than a literal physical way of doing that with a mirror on the bottle and on the box. So it's not just me portraying and projecting my experience. Now, once you receive that and you have it in your hand, you get a little bit of that yourself. You're going to see yourself in it, quite literally, which I really haven't seen anything quite like this. George had mentioned that too. He's like, no one's really done this. It is conceptual. You can take it for what it is, or you can just take it as a really shiny object that you'll have. But that's what we're going for here. So it's not just about me. It's also not just about you. It's also about, with whom you would want to reflect.
And also, the best art allows you to see yourself in new light. And so in that way, also, you can discover a side of you in an artistic way that maybe you hadn't seen before. And you almost become your own second soul.
We didn't plan that. She's just a genius.
Would you say that this fragrance is more masculine leaning or more unisex, or do you think it?
Well, like Brass and
center?
Like Brass and Soul, I was planning for it to be basically unisex, but maybe a little masculine leaning. That's what Brass and Soul was. I think the nature of this fragrance, having a darker personality, having a more earthy, smokier edge, not overtly smoky, but it is not bright and citrusy and watery like the original was. I think some people might associate that more with a masculine profile because it is darker, but it's still quite sweet. So I do believe it's still unisex, maybe leaning a little masculine. It's really going to depend on what type of personality that you want to have, elevate your own. I know you've worn it and enjoyed it. Now, if you don't know, Grace does tend to enjoy some darker profiles, maybe more so than some women do. But if you have a mind that is willing to expand, as a female who maybe you don't wear a ton of tobacco scents or darker, smokier scents, this might be worth checking out nonetheless. Again, I do think it's a personality more than anything.
I know people are going to ask this. What would you say about the performance?
Well, we made this an extrait de parfum, which is already more concentrated than Brass and Soul. Brass and Soul was 22%, which is technically an extrait, but we called it an eau de parfum. In theory, that means that it is a heavier, denser concentration, which means that it will behave a certain way, not necessarily meaning it will perform a certain way. That's going to depend on your skin chemistry, and that also depends on the notes and the ingredients. In this case, the way it performs on me is quite well. It sticks around on my skin basically all day, all night. I put it on my hand last night when we got the bottle. It was like 11 p.m. and woke up this morning. Probably by 10 a.m., 11 a.m., I was still smelling the remnants on my hand. And that was after a night of sleep with my hand under the sheets and rubbing on stuff. I was still smelling that kind of dark, warm, sweet, ambery smokiness. It was subtle. It was very subtle by that point, but it will stick around. It will hold. It's heavy. In terms of how it's going to be present to people around you, again, that's going to depend on your skin. Because it is a heavier concentration. That doesn't mean it's going to fly off. It is pretty diffusive at first spray. You spray it and then it will fill the room. It's not going to move super quickly, but it will fill. It does have spices. There are some brighter notes at the top to help it lift a bit. But after that, it's going to move slowly. It will leave a trail. It will be noticed. And you're not going to need a ton of sprays. I do think you could get away with 5 to 7. Maybe 7 if you're going to be mostly outdoors, or at the very least, it'll be climate controlled because it will be noticeable. All that being said, I learned my lesson last time. I said on camera what my experience was. On Brass and Soul, it was like, oh, I got like 13 hours out of this scent. And I did. But some people were like, well, you said you got 13. I only got 5. And it's like, your mileage can and will vary. So I'm saying that now, your mileage may vary, but know that it is intended to be a scent that has presence. And if everything goes right, it will stick around on your skin.
So Brass and Soul functioned as more of a signature year-round type of a scent. With this being darker, do you feel like it functions better in the cooler weather, or what do you think?
This is definitely going to be more of a cooler weather scent. Just by the nature of the notes, the nature of how it develops on the skin. Yes, there's a little bit of freshness up top, like I said, to help it lift, but it is by no means a fresh fragrance profile. It is dark, it is resinous, it is smoky, it is leathery in a way, it is sweet. Definitely more fall and winter, easily. So yeah, a little bit less versatile than Brass and Soul. But I don't believe it's the heaviest thing out there to where you couldn't pull it off. It would not be my first choice on a hot summer day. You know, a lot of people say you can wear whatever you want, and yes, you can. But for the same reason I wouldn't wear a turtleneck sweater in 101 degree weather, I'm not going to wear this on a hot day.
So I got to be privy to the process of creating this fragrance. And how did you know when it was finished?
That was quite a process, and I was definitely much more particular this time around. For Brass and Soul, I think we went through maybe 3 modifications at the most before I landed on like, okay, this is the one. But this time I had a little bit more experience and a little bit clearer vision, and so we went through 6 or 7 maybe modifications. I actually took some footage every time I would get a new lab violin of a modification. I'd film my first impressions. At a certain point, we got close. We reached a point where we had the general structure of the DNA. It was similar to Brass and Soul, but it was missing something. And I realized, you know what? We still need some lighter dimension to it. And then I also asked, like, hey, can we add even darker dimension on the other side? So can we just take this profile and just pull it out from itself a little bit more? We went back and forth a few more times, and then we ended up on a more balanced profile, but still one that has the identity that I was looking for.
Do you have any closing thoughts, Mr. Copeland?
Honestly, I was excited for Brass and Soul, and I wasn't excited until people started getting it, and then I started getting the feedback. Up until that point, I was just terrified. This time around, I don't have an ounce of fear in my body about Second Soul. You know, George Zaharoff is a genius. I can easily say that feels hyperbolic, but it's true. Working with him, obviously his resources have been a big help, but his creative direction, more so as a support to my own and as a supplement to my own, has been such a monumental experience. Our goal was clear. We wanted to elevate everything about the originals to a new level, and we did that from the inside out. From the presentation, we're talking about the box, we're talking about the bottle, the plate, the materials, even down to how we're going to present things on the postcard that we have. We have a polishing cloth with mine that I requested last minute, and he's like, yes, let's do that, so you guys can keep everything looking shiny and clean. Everything about it is elevated. Obviously, the bottle is twice the size as well. We're really excited about that. We think it's a great deal for everything that went into this. The materials, again, there are no corners cut. So we do believe you're getting a quality product through and through for what we believe is a good price. We really wanted to keep the price at a certain threshold. So I'm confident about this fragrance. I'm so happy with it. It's a joy to wear. And I just look forward to getting it into your hands and into your noses and hearing what you think.